Hey everyone, welcome to this episode with Marion Abrams. Today we're going to be talking about persistence in podcasting. And Marion has been the producer of the Spartan Up Podcast for the last 7 years. They have over 30 million downloads at this point. She also has a podcast called the Grounded Content Podcast. And again, she knows a thing or two about persistence. Actually, really cool. She's on a 100+ day streak of running at least a mile a day. So we're going to talk about persistence in podcasting and in life. Should be a fun conversation.
I love the intro. Yes.
I'm glad you liked it. And clearly you're a badass, 100 straight days of running. You're just telling me too that you woke up at 4 a.m. You got to tell me why you woke up at 4 a.m. today and ascended the mountaintop. Tell me about it.
So my client, Joe DeSena, the host of the Spartan Up Podcast, the show that I produce, he's in Vermont and he's down the road he's down the road. And this morning he wanted to shoot a bunch of stuff. And of course that means meeting at sunrise to hike up the mountain and record, some social media content and some podcast content. And I was just telling you this morning that as I was hiking and setting up and recording stuff, I was thinking about our conversation today and the fact that it was coming up. And I thought, what do I want to, what's on my mind that's podcast related? And I thought to myself, it's don't worry about the rules, worry about your audience and worry about your message. Right. And so there's this little story that I was telling that, I posted a photo on my website of 2 microphones standing in the middle of the woods. And a bunch of really accomplished podcasting professionals said to me, don't put that photo on your website. No one would do that. That doesn't look real. And of course, I was like, well, it is real. That's what we do on our podcast. And it sounds great. It looks great. It works. We're outside. It's consistent with our message. So, that was what I was thinking about this morning. Don't worry about the rules. Just worry about your message and worry about your audience.
Yeah, I feel like if people aren't telling you you're doing something wrong, then you might be doing something wrong sometimes, and it seems like you have so would you guys actually record the podcast interviews in the sessions outdoors sometimes?
Very often. Yeah.
Which is so proper because Spartan is all about getting outside, being active.
Exactly. For years, Joe, the host, was like, I don't want to do the interviews sitting down. We got to do them standing up. Even if we were indoors in a building, he always wanted to do them standing up,
Yeah, I really want to figure out a way to do these interviews while walking. Yeah. And it's what I was thinking is I could create a baby stroller, take an old baby stroller and add a tripod to it. And then have the computer right in front of it or something. There would have to be some crazy
I love
rig
this
that I
idea.
create.
Maybe one of those jogging strollers. So it's a little smoother, right? Actually, you could use an Osmo,
suspension.
An Osmo or a GoPro or something, which has a little motion stabilizing. And then you just wear a lavalier mic. The only hard part would be seeing the other person, right?
I guess I think I could situate my laptop somehow, but it's possible. Or your
phone, your iPhone, right?
Your phone, yeah. And I'm a big proponent of walking, and I just think that being outside gives you such great inspiration. And there's actually a study that shows that walking can boost your creativity by up to 60%. So I think if you can just lead, if you can be 60% more creative with your questions and with your conversations, that's a lot. So trying to gain that edge. And at the end of the day too, maybe like Joe, I would rather be outside than behind my computer. Right. But at the end of the day, we need good audio quality. We need good video quality. We need to deliver on our promise to our audience, which is for me is to educate them on content repurposing and video. So we're doing this for now.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say the first time that you and I met, that was what was so great, right? You said, how about if we don't do another Zoom? Let's call on the phone and do a walking meeting. And I was like, oh my God, this is the best. Because that's what all meetings used to be. Any phone meeting used to be, take your phone, walk around outside. Even before cell phones, you had the little extension and that was the beauty of living where I do. And now I'm stuck at this desk in my little studio space here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, that was a great way to meet. And then now we're here, sometimes if you got to do video, and here we are. But I want to start with this conversation kind of talking about a personal habit that you have, that you've created, and how maybe it's kind of taught you some lessons about consistency and how that's come into play with podcasting. But So you've been running at least a mile a day for over 100 days, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, this is 100% right. Yesterday was day 168. And so what I do is I have to run 1 mile every day. And it's something that I set up just to like it works for my psyche, right? And a lot of people talk about the negatives of social media. I try to harness it for positive. So one of the things I do is I tell people I run a mile every day. And then even though they don't really care, I hold myself accountable, and I don't post it every day, but every week or so I'll say, hey, day 168, check mark, day 169, check mark. And the hardest part is I hold myself accountable. And when I miss a day, I have to get on there and I have to say, hey, I missed a day. And when I miss a day, I go back to 0. So I've been doing this for, started a year ago, January. And so there was one period where I missed a couple of months, but other than that, every time I just run every day, 1 mile. And then if I miss a day, I move back to 0. So usually sometimes I get to like 50 days, I miss a day. Sometimes I get to like, the best I've done is 100 and, well, I guess this is the best I've done, 168. And I'm kind of secretly thinking I want to get to 365, but
yeah,
the hard part,
halfway there.
well, here's the tricky part. And this goes to what you're talking about, this consistency and podcasting goals and consistency in running goals and life goals and all of that, right? If I make my goal run 365 days, it's great because it drives me to keep going, but it's also really counterproductive because what happens on day 365? I say, great, I did it, time to rest. Whereas when my goal is run a mile every day, just run a mile every day, there is no end. And that's true with podcasting, right? There is no end.
That is both uplifting and kind of scary at the same time, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
But it kind of goes into, personally, I don't do well with setting like big, huge goals like that. I do better if I just say, all right, if I committed to this habit and stick to it, then you're going to get to XYZ goal. Like I need to kind of reverse engineer it and think about my goals in terms of the habit that I have to do on a daily or weekly basis. It just makes it way easier for me.
It's a really good way to think about it.
Do you think that there's something special about that habit of running 1 mile a day versus like, all right, I'm just going to run 5 miles twice a week? Like what is it that's special about doing it every single day?
Yeah. And this is really like about your, like finding what works for your psychology. And this is what worked for mine. And for me, like I need to take all the thought and all the excuses out of the equation. And so when I actually know it would probably be better for me to commit to exercising 30 days and some days do yoga and some days run and some days, or to say, vary the lengths of my run. Some days do a 5 mile run, some days take a day off. That would probably be physically healthier, but I needed to take all the decision making and all the excuses out of the equation. So when I when I said there was like a couple months that I missed, that was because I tried to do varied workouts. And I just got hung up on what's the workout? What do I need to do? It just was that much more to get in my way. And I'm focused on my work. I'm focused on my family. And so this way it's like, number one, I know what I have to do. Run a mile. Like there's no guesswork. I don't have to, once I'm out the door, that's the hardest part. Like I just have to get out there and do it. And the other thing is a mile, even at my pace, even if you include getting the shoes on and changing the clothes, it's 15 or 20 minutes, all told. Changing your clothes, everything. There's no day that there isn't 15 or 20 minutes. And so that also, because my schedule, especially in these kind of businesses, if you do freelance work or you're working with different clients, there's a lot of variety. You don't always control your schedule. And so making it something that I can just, like, there's always 15 minutes. So that's what works for me.
Do you like get your clothes ready the night before, your running clothes? Or are there any things that maybe a certain time of day when you find it easiest to get outside?
So it would be smarter to do it the same time every day, right? And I don't know if you've read the book like Atomic Habits, and he talks about habit stacking or, using certain triggers. That would definitely be better. I haven't reached that point. So when it's super hot out, I'll run early in the morning, but most of the time I run when I finish work, like 5 o'clock, finish work, because I work from my house. So that gives me kind of an artificial structure. I finish work, I go for my run, I come back and then start doing the dinner stuff with the family. But it probably would be better to have it a set time. But honestly, there's times when I've sat down at 8 o'clock, suddenly realized 9 o'clock, oh man, I forgot my run, and I'll put on the reflective vest and get out and get the run in.
That's awesome. What do you think that this process, what you said, 168 days at this point, right, has taught you about podcasting, about content? You know, how do you think that specific habit of running has kind of crept its way into your work habits as well?
I think it's both ways. I think they've both influenced each other, and podcasting is unrelenting, right? Tuesday comes every week, right? If you have a show that comes out on Tuesday, every week, Tuesday comes back again before you know it. It's unrelenting. And so part of being successful is just continuing to show up, right? You need to not only just continue to show up, that's not enough, right? For a podcast, you need to keep iterating and improving, but it's a part of it. That's like the base level. At a minimum, you need to show up. And I can remember a day when we were first talking about this podcast, and we now have 750 something episodes under our belt, but we were first launching, we were maybe 50 or so episodes in, and we were sitting there talking, and somebody said to Joe and I, how many episodes are you guys going to do? And he said, I don't know, I think 500. And the guy said, at one a week, that would be 10 years. And both of us looked, we were like, what? No, there's no way we would do this for 10 years. We've been doing it since we started in 2014, started shooting, and publishing. We started in 2015. So we're 6 years in, and still, I mean, there's still just a lot to learn and a lot to learn again. I think I would say that's something a lot like running a mile every day, right? It's not easy every day. Like, you learn something new, you exercise, and like, it's a challenge in a new way. And so even when you learn the same lesson, you learn it in a different way.
Yeah. And I mean, you all started 6.5, 7 years ago, right? Kind of before podcasting was cool to some extent. And it was really still early in its infancy. I would still argue that podcasting is in its infancy. But it was like so new at that point. What was the prompt that encouraged you guys to go out on a limb and say, hey, we should try podcasting and get into that space?
We were already doing some pretty innovative content. We were doing webisodes. I don't know if I told you the story, but we did a series with this guy, Chris Davis, and this was pre-podcast. And the guy came to Vermont. He was about 500 pounds, and over 20 weeks lost about 100 pounds, and went from not being able to physically jump at all, like an inch, or walk up a moderate hill, to doing an event called the Spartan Beast at Killington, which was 16 miles up and down the mountain over obstacles, just an unbelievable event. And so we had done every week for 20 weeks, followed that story, and kind of building webisodes, web series. So we'd done a lot with content. We knew that the content was super engaging. And when Joe came out with his first book, which was called Spartan Up, he was promoting the book and he was doing podcast appearances, and they were really resonating with people. And when he traveled, he found that people recognized his voice from the podcast appearances. And so that was what prompted, like, hey, let's do our own. Let's get this going. And it has turned out to be really an incredible resource in so many different ways.
Well, how would you say, like, year one, how have the challenges changed from that first year, 2 years of infancy to now 6, 7 years later? Like, it can't get easier if you're going to continue to grow. I think the challenges just shift. So how have those challenges shifted since the inception of the podcast?
The challenges have shifted completely. The format has shifted. Of course, we recorded every episode in person until the pandemic. So that was a huge challenge and a huge complicating factor, but also a huge benefit, because meeting people in person, you just make a better connection. It's more memorable. Even if it was harder to schedule, there was a lot more logistics. but there was a real energy to that. So then the challenge recently became, how do we do it virtually? And here's a great story if you're stuck with your podcast. And I've talked to people about what to do when they're stuck. In fact, I did an episode in Grounded Content, and I had like 5 different strategies for when you're stuck. And one of them happened to me, I don't know, about 4 years into the podcast. One day I went to Joe, and we had been working on a bunch of episodes. And I said, boy, I am on the hairy edge of burnout. I am like, just like this close. And by the end of the day, he had basically doubled my workload. Now,
why?
Because when I jumped in with both feet and I got excited by a new challenge, I actually regained my energy. And so I can't say maybe he just did it because he needed more work. It may not have been for my own benefit. But what happened was we added a bunch of new hosts. We added Zach Evanesh, who was doing motivational stuff. We added Brian Shantosh, who was doing leadership stuff. We added Dr. Nada, who was doing nutritional stuff. Those series are all gone now, but we went from 1 day a week to 4 days a week. Wow. And I was able to work with these 4 new hosts and really build new products, teach new hosts how to be hosts, build a new format, a new structure, build these new series. And that got me excited again. And that re-energized me in a way that I needed at that time.
Yeah, I've noticed that with me sometimes, like if I'm feeling like I'm in a rut, tasks are taking longer than they really should. I just don't feel focused. I don't feel like I've made progress at the end of the day. But when I bring something new to the table, like this live stream, for instance, that I'm investing a lot of time in over the last two months, really, I feel so energized to do it. And I think sometimes, as much as persistence is key and consistency is key, like you also got to switch things up every once in a while to stay, sane and stay happy.
Yeah. And I think you have to, sometimes it's getting in touch with what got you into it. So like if you have a podcast about, knitting, maybe you've stopped knitting, right? Maybe you need to get back into it. Maybe you need to kind of get back in touch with that thing that was exciting about it.
Yeah. So sometimes I'm afraid, like, I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, they take something that they love, and whether it's like maybe a sport or something like that, or maybe like a food, and then they're like, all right, how do I turn a business out of this? Or how do I make a business out of this interest and passion? But then along the process, you kind of lose your passion for that passion because you've made it all about business. I think that's a shame sometimes. And sometimes I have to reel it back in. I'm like, Grant, you don't need to make everything a business, okay? So there's some things like knitting or playing ukulele or running that you can just keep as a passion and do it for fun. And I think that's important. But I'm curious. So I know you have a history with extreme sports documentaries. Is that true?
So not exactly documentaries, but yeah, I mean, I when I first came to Vermont, what I primarily did was I shot on snow. I shot skiing. Okay. I shot a lot of skiing stuff. I shot a lot of mountain biking, marathons, Land Rover, challenges, things like that. So yeah, what we used to call non-ball sports.
Gotcha. I assume a lot of those projects probably took months of planning, maybe weeks of planning, and then weeks of editing, right?
So, I have a unique perspective in that I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different roles. And so on those jobs, I was literally a camera person. So that was just me running around in the woods, like chasing people. I have also edited, in that case, an hour show about the Newport to Bermuda race, produced my own film about a flood that happened. So many of those films and projects that I've produced and directed take a huge amount of planning and follow. Yeah.
I'm curious though, like how like your workflow and maybe your mentality towards the work shifts with something like that. That's like a really big project. Maybe it takes 3 months to get everything together, maybe a year, versus a podcast where it's like a weekly release and you have to stay a little more, mobile and in more mad motion, I guess you could say. Like, is the mentality really similar, or do you kind of completely have to shift your workflow? Like, what are maybe some of the similarities and differences in those two types of work?
That's an interesting question. Yeah. The long-term work, what I do is I kind of back time it like you were talking about. I will figure out, okay, what are the tasks that need to be done? When are the deadlines for each one, right? So if, delivery to the TV station is this date, okay, how many rounds of revision are there before that? And how many, how long is it going to edit? And I will make myself usually daily deadlines or weekly deadlines. And so they're self-imposed, but there's no, they're just as hard and fast as the final deadline, because I know there's no way I'll make the final deadline if I don't make all those milestones along the way. So with a long-term project, I have to be really disciplined in terms of what each daily accomplishment is. With something like the podcast, like I could edit the whole episode in 7 or 8 hours. So I always know, like, if I really procrastinated, like I could start it after work ended on Monday night and finish it up, before work starts on Tuesday morning and make the Tuesday deadline. So it makes it honestly, in some ways makes me, I can be lazier with it. I can be more flexible with it. With the model that we used before COVID, it was actually more like a film production, because what we would do, which was a little different, we would pick a date. Maybe we had like a Spartan race at Dodger Stadium. And we would pick that date, we'd get a room, and we would start reaching out to everybody we could think of that might be an interesting guest that lived in that area, and said, hey, can you come on this date to this location to be interviewed? And then we'd schedule them throughout the day. We'd do like 45-minute slots, one after the other, and we might do 10 interviews in a day. And the energy is incredible because you also get the synergy. Everybody's like coming and going. And you got Rich Roll coming in as, Cal Fussman is leaving, and, they're meeting each other, and Mark Devine comes in, and like all these people are like meeting each other, hanging out. It's really like there's a lot of energy. And we have our co-hosts. We had Sephora Colonel Nye and Johnny Waite. And so there's just like a lot of energy. But then what happens is I come home and I've got 16 episodes recorded, all with, audio that needs to be synced. And then I start putting them into the calendar. And I don't want to do all ones from Dodger Stadium. I want to mix in some from Tahoe. And so then I take the schedule, and there it's like a film, because I have hours and hours of content. I'm just deploying it over the months and months to come. So I would do like, this episode on this week, this episode the next week. And then I'm going through, we had the added element that we had intros. So we would have our co-hosts, Sephora, Johnny, Colonel Nye, and Joe, who would intro every episode. So what we would do is we'd record all the episodes, send them a copy, they would review them all, and then we'd all get together and we would do like 40 intros in one day. And so it would be like months and months of content that then I would work through in the back end, putting together all the episodes.
Yeah, you're doing a lot in bulk. Clearly,
Yeah.
what I see in common between both of those is the long-term projects.
Yeah.
And the podcasting is that you have a process, and that you have healthy habits that help spread the work out over time. And that hopefully make you not go insane, right? I think you mentioned you were kind of like really close to burnout at one point, but you had to reel it back in. And I think we've all found ourselves at that point at one time or another, in which case you've got to make some changes. So, for the podcaster out there that's maybe starting to feel burnout, but also at the same time wants to continue improving their show and make it better, can we just talk about maybe some healthy habits that you've come across over the past 7 years and over the course of your life that can help you do work more efficiently, do it better, and also not go insane at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not perfect at this, right? And so part of what I do is I've been doing it so long that I can use my intuition a little bit, and I can go with the flow to the degree that if I don't have a hard deadline that day, I will say like, hey, I just feel creative, right? So I'm going to experiment with some editing content, or I'm going to, or I feel like curious, I'm going to spend some time listening to other podcasts, thinking about how they do things. Or I feel, I want to work on camera work, or, I will do the work that I feel like doing, right? To a certain degree. It's always getting the work done. but I'm able to kind of balance that with the hard deadlines. And so I kind of mentally map out the day too, and I look at the size of the spaces and the size of the task and the attention the task needs. And I try to kind of shuffle them around in my mind to get them to fill in the space.
Gotcha. Yeah. I find myself getting distracted sometimes with experimenting with like new editing techniques as well. Maybe it's that distraction. I think I call it distraction sometimes, but it's also necessary because you've got to
It's part of the
getting
process.
better.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's what's fun too. I think that's what I really enjoy is finding new ways to do things. That's kind of like my zone of genius. So it's important to, I think, let yourself do that, but then also, all right, you got to make sure that you're getting done what you need to get done.
You got to get done what you need to get done. And that's that, like, back to where we started, right? Don't worry about the rules, worry about the message and your audience. And that experimentation is part of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to do things the way somebody told you to do, the way somebody else does. You need to do things the way that makes sense. Like, ask why more and figure out what your audience wants to hear and what your essential message is. And don't worry about all the rules.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this plays into when you're starting your show or when you're making changes to the format with your frequency. All right, how often am I going to do this? Is it going to be every single day, 5 days a week? Is it going to be twice a month? Is it going to be once a month? If you've made a commitment and say, I'm going to do weekly shows, do you think there's anything wrong with saying this isn't working? I need to change it.
That's such a tricky question because we started Spartan Up in 2014, and I have literally missed one Tuesday.
Wow.
And in that week, that was mid-pandemic, and I published the episode on Wednesday. Once, right? The whole time. And as I said, Tuesday's unrelenting, it comes every week. And I think that we wouldn't have had the success we have. Not that it mattered so much every week that I met Tuesday's deadline, but that mindset that it's kind of like the daily run, right? I needed to hold myself accountable because once you allow, at least the way my psychology works, once you allow an excuse to creep in, then you create a habit of excuses. And so if you're committed to every Tuesday, you could say, like, does it really matter if I miss this week? No, it probably doesn't. But then you said the habit. What happens next week? What happens the next week after that? Now, for my personal show, I don't do that at all. Grounded content. I'm excited about exploring these ideas, having the chance to be on the mic, having the chance to be the one asking the questions instead of feeding the questions to other people. But this isn't really like a client-driven, business-driven project. That podcast is really my chance to experiment, to try things, to meet people, to have great conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So with that show, if Spartan Up gets in the way or there's a family priority, I will push that back and I will miss a week. So it really gets down to, again, there's no rules. What's your goal, right? What is and I have this thing I call the 5 Ps. What is your purpose? And by that, I mean, what is your purpose tactically? Do you want to build sponsorships? Do you want to drive traffic to your website? Do you want to meet great people? Do you want to have fun conversations and it's your creative hobby? Do you want to sell your book? Are you selling courses? What's your purpose? And let that determine how much energy and effort you're putting in and the plan you build. And so for me, for grounded content, that purpose is really an opportunity to have personal development, getting comfortable being on the mic, and an opportunity to have these discussions. And that purpose may change. I'm on episode 25, and as I kind of get my legs under me, I may get more focused in a business sense on that. Spartan Up is really, about building that brand and about also generating content for the brand and for Joe DeSena, who is the spokesperson for that brand. It's a huge source of content that ends up across all platforms. And so it really depends on what your purpose is. Again, whether you make those exceptions or what your schedule is, You have to see what your purpose is, what the benefit is going to be for you, and then what resources and assets you're willing to put against it.
Yeah. I think if there is a good enough reason for you doing something, you're gonna do it consistently. If it means enough to you, and you understand what it can do for your business, what it can do for just your energy levels and your excitement, then it's worth it. And that's how I feel really grateful. I feel after a conversation like this and getting to interview you and just talk about our businesses, like our expertise, is like after it, I feel energized, and that makes me want to keep coming back. So I think finding a way to channel, like find that zone where you do feel energized after doing your best work and the hard work. Like it's a lot of work to set this show up and schedule great people and do all the graphics, but it makes me feel great. And I think that's what it's all about. With that being said, I want to thank you for coming on and bringing your expertise, talking about some stories, some habits. You mind just sharing a little bit more about where people can find more about Grounded content, about Mad Motion, about your consulting work, and such?
I would love to. So yeah, if people want to kind of dig in one-on-one about some of these ideas about really how you build an effective podcast, whether you started a podcast and it's just not doing enough for you, or you're thinking about it and you want to figure out whether it makes sense and how to build a show that builds your platform or achieves your goals. That's the consulting work I do. And you can just go to madmotion.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, where Grant is and where you're probably watching this. My podcast, Grounded Content, I love to have people listen to that. We really talk about marketing, messaging, but from a grounded point of view with the ethics involved. And of course, Spartan Up, which is a kick in the behind 3 days a week to just keep you on track, right? We all need that virtual community. I listen to the show. It keeps me motivated, and that's what it should do for others.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, stay steady, everyone. Stay steady, Marion. I'll keep trying to stay steady. And thanks.
Thank you.